I was replacing a rotted deck board on my cabin porch when my son-in-law asked me how much the place was worth. Should have known right then something was wrong. Decent men don't ask questions like that. Not sure, Marcus, I said, keeping my eyes on the wood. Never had it appraised. Why? Just curious. He smiled that financial advisor smile, the one that probably worked on clients but never quite reached his eyes. Beautiful property. Must be worth a fortune now with how the market's been. I hammered in another nail. The sound echoed across the valley, where my wife Sarah and I had planned to grow old together. 2 years since the cancer took her, and I still heard her laugh in the wind through the pines. It's worth what it means to me, I said. Everything else is just numbers. Marcus nodded, but I caught him scanning the property line, doing mental calculations. My daughter Petra stood behind him, 7 months pregnant, looking tired in a way that had nothing to do with the baby. That conversation happened on a Saturday in June. By Monday, I knew I had a war coming. My name is Thaddeus Brennan. Thad to most people. I'm 63, spent 40 years as a structural engineer before retiring early after Sarah died. Built this cabin with my own hands in the mountains outside Cody, Wyoming. 40 acres of forest and silence. The kind of place where you can hear yourself think, or in my case, stop thinking. Sarah and I bought the land in 1998 for $55,000. The plan was simple. Work until 60, retire here together, finally have the time we'd been promising ourselves for 30 years. Then stage 4 pancreatic cancer rewrote the ending in 6 months. After the funeral, I couldn't stay in our house in Billings. Too many ghosts. So I sold it, moved to the cabin full-time, and tried to figure out what a man does with the rest of his life when the person who made it worth living is gone. Petra wasn't thrilled about me hiding in the woods, but she had her own life. Physical therapist, nice house in Bozeman, and Marcus. They'd been married 4 years when Sarah died. He seemed solid enough back then. Former college baseball player turned financial advisor. Said the right things at the funeral. I didn't love him, but I didn't have to. Petra did. Or I thought she did. The week after Marcus asked about the cabin's value, Petra called. Dad, are you okay? Same as always. Why? Marcus said you seemed confused when we visited, like you weren't tracking the conversation. I set down my coffee. Confused how? He said you asked him the same question 3 times, and you left the stove on when we went for a walk. Neither of those things happened. Petra, I asked him one question about his parents, and I didn't use the stove that day. We had sandwiches. Silence on the line. Then, he's worried about you, Dad. So am I. I'm fine. Lonely sometimes, but my brain works just fine. Maybe you should see someone. Get checked out. Safe from what? She hung up, and I sat there staring at my phone, feeling the first cold drop of dread in my gut. 40 years of engineering taught me one thing. When a structure starts showing stress cracks, you don't ignore them. You investigate, you document, you calculate points of failure. So I started paying attention. The second crack appeared 2 weeks later. Petra called again, sounding strained. Dad, have you been paying your bills? Of course, auto pay for everything. Why? Marcus talked to someone at the county office. They said your property taxes are overdue. I pulled up my bank account. Looking at it right now, paid in full, April 15th, confirmation number and everything. That's good. She didn't sound relieved. Marcus must have misunderstood. Must have. But I knew he hadn't. You don't misunderstand something that specific. I called the county assessor myself. Property taxes current. No issues. No one had called asking about my account. That's when I started documenting everything. I bought a small notebook and started writing down every interaction, every phone call, every concern that got raised. July 12th. Petra asks if I'm eating properly. Says Marcus is worried I've lost weight. I haven't. Same 185 pounds I've been since retirement. July 19th. Petra mentions I sounded off during our last call. We talked about baby names and the weather. Nothing unusual. July 23rd. Marcus calls directly. Wants to help me organize my affairs while I'm still sharp enough. I tell him my affairs are organized fine. July 30th. Petra calls crying. Says she's scared I'm going to hurt myself living alone. Says I told Marcus I didn't see the point anymore without Sarah. I never said that. I'd thought it plenty of times. But I never said it out loud, and certainly not to Marcus. That's when I realized what I was looking at. This wasn't concern. This was a campaign. I spent 3 days thinking it through like an engineering problem. Someone, Marcus, clearly, was building a narrative. The narrative was, Thad Brennan is declining mentally and can't care for himself. The question was, why? The answer sat on 40 acres of timber with a hand-built cabin in the middle. Quick search on Zillow showed comparable properties in the area selling for $390,000 for the structure, another $210,000 for the land. Call it $600,000 total. Not bad for a $55,000 investment 27 years ago, but it wasn't about the money for me. This was Sarah's place. This was where I still felt connected to her. This was supposed to be Petra's inheritance, the one thing I could leave her that meant something. And now someone was trying to take it. I needed to understand the mechanism, so I researched conservatorship law in Wyoming. Turns out, it's not that hard to get someone declared incompetent if you're patient and systematic. You need medical documentation of cognitive decline, evidence of inability to manage finances, testimony from family members, and a judge who assumes the family has the elder's best interests at heart. Most judges rubber stamp these petitions. They see adult children trying to protect aging parents from deteriorating judgment. Noble, loving, necessary, except when it's not. I spent the next week researching Marcus Caney's background. Turns out, a financial advisor's professional history is easy to check when you know where to look. Marcus got his Series 7 license in 2015, worked for 2 different firms before going independent in 2019. According to public records, he filed for personal bankruptcy in early 2018. Discharged 6 months later. Married Petra that fall, barely a year after his financial collapse. His parents, Leonard and Vivian Kane, owned a modest house in Sheridan, assessed value around $275,000. But property records showed they'd taken out a home equity line of credit in 2021 for $165,000. That's 60% of the home's value. Nobody does that unless they're desperate. I made a few discreet calls to people I knew in Sheridan. Took about 2 days to get the story. Leonard Caney had a gambling problem. Online poker, sports betting, the works. Burned through their retirement savings and then some. The HELOC was a stopgap, but even that was running dry. So Marcus had motive. His parents were underwater, he had a history of financial trouble, and his wife was about to inherit a $600,000 property from a lonely old widower living alone in the woods. A widower who could be made to seem incompetent with the right narrative. I remembered Marcus at Sarah's funeral, how he'd held Petra when she collapsed at the graveside, how he'd helped carry the casket, how he'd looked me in the eye and said, "Sir, I promise I'll take care of her." And I think he'd meant it. But that was before his father's stroke the following year, before the medical bills and Leonard's gambling spiral, before Marcus looked at this cabin and saw a lifeline instead of a home. Desperation doesn't excuse theft, but it explains how a decent man becomes something else. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Now I needed to prove it. The thing about being an engineer is you learn patience. You don't rush a foundation. You don't cut corners on load calculations. You do the work right, in the right order, even when it takes longer. So I built my defense the same way I'd build a structure, from the ground up. Over 3 weeks, I constructed my case like a foundation that couldn't crack. First, I called Dr. Helen Rourke, my physician in Billings, made an appointment for a full cognitive assessment. She ran me through the complete battery: mini mental state examination, Montreal cognitive assessment, the works. I scored 29 out of 30 on the MMSE, perfect score on the MOCA. Dr. Rourke's report: patient shows no signs of cognitive impairment, fully capable of managing his own affairs. I got 3 notarized copies. Next, I organized every financial document from the past 3 years: bank statements, investment accounts, property tax receipts, all paid on time, all managed properly. I documented my assets: the cabin and land, my retirement accounts totaling $1.2 million from my 401k, IRA, and investment accounts from Sarah's life insurance payout. Paid off truck, no debt, no outstanding bills. I was more financially stable than 90% of 63-year-olds in America. Then I drove to Cody and met with an attorney named Rebecca Chen. She specialized in elder law and estate planning. "Mr. Brennan, I see cases like this more than I'd like," she said after I explained the situation. Adult children trying to declare competent parents incapacitated to gain control of assets. It's elder financial abuse, and it's more common than people think. Can they succeed? If you don't fight back, yes. If you document everything and stay proactive, much harder. She drafted a new trust agreement, the Brennan Family Living Trust. I was the trustee, Petra the beneficiary, but with an important clause: the trust was irrevocable. Nobody could claim I was mismanaging assets because the assets were in trust with explicit instructions. The cabin and land would go to Petra, but only after my death. No conservator could touch it. We also drafted a durable power of attorney naming Rebecca as my agent for financial decisions if I ever did become incapacitated. Not Petra, not Marcus, a neutral third party with a legal obligation to act in my interests. Cost me $3,500, but it was worth every penny. Finally, the part I hated but knew was necessary: I needed to document Marcus's campaign. I bought a small digital recorder. Wyoming is a one-party consent state, meaning I could legally record conversations as long as I was part of them. Every call with Marcus or Petra from that point forward got recorded and backed up to cloud storage. I also set up a security camera system around the cabin. 4 cameras with cloud backup covering the approaches and main interior spaces. If anyone claimed I was living in squalor or couldn't care for myself, I'd have video evidence showing a clean, well-maintained home and a functional human being. It felt paranoid. It felt like preparing for war with my own family. But I was. The attack came in September, right after Petra had the baby. Beautiful little girl, 7 pounds 4 ounces, named Lily after Sarah's mother. I drove to Bozeman the day after she was born, brought flowers and a stuffed bear, held my granddaughter for the first time, and felt something in my chest that hadn't moved since Sarah died. Hope, maybe. Or just love, with nowhere else to go. Petra looked exhausted but happy. Marcus looked distracted, checking his phone every few minutes. I stayed for an hour, then headed back to let them rest. 2 days later, I got a call from Adult Protective Services. "Mr. Brennan, this is Jennifer Walsh with Wyoming APS. We've received a report of concern regarding your welfare. I'd like to schedule a home visit." My stomach dropped, but my voice stayed steady. "What kind of concern?" "The report indicates you may be experiencing cognitive decline and living in unsafe conditions. Standard procedure. We just want to make sure you're doing okay." "Who filed the report?" "I can't disclose that, but it came from a family member." "Marcus." "Had to be." We scheduled it for the following week. I spent the days cleaning a cabin that was already clean, organizing documents that were already organized, trying not to think about the fact that my son-in-law was actively trying to get me declared incompetent so he could steal the last thing Sarah and I built together. Jennifer Walsh arrived at 10 a.m., sharp. mid-40s, kind eyes, sensible shoes. She looked around the cabin with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen the full spectrum of elder living conditions. What she found: a well-maintained home, fully stocked refrigerator, no safety hazards, bathroom and kitchen clean, smoke detectors functional, medications properly stored and current. She interviewed me for an hour. Memory questions, daily routine, social connections, health status. At the end, she closed her notebook. "Mr. Brennan, I'm going to be honest with you. Whoever filed this report either has severely outdated information or is not being truthful. You're clearly capable of living independently. Your home is in excellent condition, you're articulate and mentally sharp, and you have no care needs that I can see. So you'll close the case? I'll file a report stating there's no basis for intervention." "But," she hesitated. "Off the record? Watch your back. When family members file false reports like this, it's usually about money or control. You might want to talk to a lawyer." "Already did, but thank you." After she left, I sat on the porch and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind. The cold, calculated kind. The kind that builds foundations and waits for the right moment to pour concrete. Marcus had just made his first move. Now it was my turn. I called Petra that night. "We need to talk." "About what?" She sounded defensive already. "About Marcus calling APS and trying to have me declared incompetent." Silence. Then, "Dad, he's just worried." "No." My voice came out harder than I intended. "He's not worried. He's positioning. And you need to know what's really happening here." "What are you talking about?" I took a breath. This was going to hurt her, and I hated that. But she needed to know. Marcus is in financial trouble. His parents are drowning in gambling debt, and he sees this cabin as a solution. If he can get me declared incompetent and get himself appointed as conservator, he controls my assets, including the property. That's insane. Marcus wouldn't... "Petra." I kept my voice gentle but firm. "I have documentation. The APS investigator found no basis for concern. My doctor certified me as fully competent. My finances are in perfect order. This isn't about my well-being. This is about a $600,000 property that Marcus thinks he can access through you." More silence. I could hear her breathing, could imagine her trying to reconcile the man she married with what I was telling her. "I don't believe you," she finally said. "I know. But I need you to pay attention to what happens next, because he's not done." She hung up. I sat there in the dark, listening to the wind in the pines, and wondered if I'd just lost my daughter to protect a piece of land. But it wasn't just land. It was Sarah's dream. It was Petra's inheritance. It was the principle of the thing. Some things you don't surrender, even when surrender would be easier. 2 weeks passed in tense silence. Then, late one night, I got an email from Petra. No subject line, no message, just a PDF attachment. I opened it with shaking hands. 42 pages. Medical certification of my competence. Perfect financial records. The APS report clearing me completely. And the public records showing Marcus's bankruptcy, his parents' HELOC, documentation of Leonard's gambling losses. The next morning, Petra called. Her voice sounded different, smaller. "Dad, can I come see you? Alone?" "Of course." She arrived that afternoon, 6-week-old Lily in a car seat, no Marcus. We sat on the porch while the baby slept between us. "I read everything you sent," she said quietly. And then I started looking on my own. She pulled out her phone. "Marcus has a folder on his laptop. He doesn't know I know the password." She showed me photos of documents, emails between Marcus and a lawyer in Cheyenne, discussing conservatorship strategy and establishing pattern of incompetence. Messages to his parents about the cabin situation and waiting for the old man to slip up. and one email that made my blood run cold. Once we have conservatorship, we can force sale of the property. Petra will inherit eventually anyway, just on a timeline that actually helps us. She doesn't need to know the details. I confronted him last night, Petra said, her voice barely above a whisper. Waited until he was asleep, then I went through everything. At 2 a.m., I woke him up. She stared out at the valley. I asked him one simple question. Is my father incompetent, or have you been lying to me for 6 months? What did he say? Nothing. At first, just silence. She wiped her eyes. Then I told him I was leaving, that I'd file for divorce unless he could look me in the eye and tell me you were actually declining. That if he couldn't do that, everything he'd said for the past 6 months was a lie. And? He tried to explain, said his parents were losing everything, said we needed that money, said I didn't understand how desperate things were. She looked at me. He never once said you were actually incompetent. Not once. Petra was crying quietly now. I married him. I had his baby. I almost helped him steal from you. I put my arm around her. You didn't know. He's good at this. And he was counting on you loving me enough to want to protect me, even from myself. She leaned against my shoulder. What do we do? We finish this, but it's going to get ugly. She looked at me, and I saw Sarah in her face, the same steel that got my wife through 6 months of hell without once complaining. Then let's make sure we win. The next morning, Petra packed a bag and moved into the cabin with Lily. Marcus called 17 times that first day. She didn't answer. On the 3rd day, she filed for divorce. Marcus tried everything. First, he apologized, said he'd been stressed about his parents and made bad decisions. Then he claimed she had postpartum depression and wasn't thinking clearly. Finally, he threatened to fight for custody of Lily, unless she came to her senses. Big mistake. Turns out threatening to take a woman's newborn baby is a great way to ensure she never backs down. Rebecca Chen referred Petra to a divorce attorney who specialized in high-conflict cases. They built a file showing Marcus's financial irregularities, his emails discussing the conservatorship scheme, and his pattern of deception. I thought maybe that would be the end of it. Marcus would back down, accept the divorce, and we could all move forward. I was wrong. 3 days after Petra filed the divorce papers, Rebecca called me at 6 a.m. Thad, we have a problem. Marcus just filed an emergency conservatorship petition. Hearing is scheduled for Friday, 72 hours from now. My blood went cold. On what grounds? He's claiming you called him Monday night threatening self-harm. Says he's worried you're a danger to yourself and possibly to Petra and the baby. He has a witness. His mother, Vivian, will testify she heard the call on speaker. I didn't call him Monday night. I didn't call him at all. I know, but this is his Hail Mary play. If he can get emergency conservatorship, he controls your assets until a full hearing. And Petra... Rebecca paused. Petra isn't answering her phone. I tried Petra's cell. Straight to voicemail. Tried again. Again. Nothing. Find her, Rebecca said. We need her testimony about those emails. Without her, this becomes he said, and judges err on the side of caution in emergency petitions. I spent the next 6 hours calling everyone I knew. Petra's friends, her coworkers, even her old physical therapy supervisor. No one had seen her since yesterday morning. By Wednesday evening, panic was setting in. My daughter was unreachable. My freedom was 72 hours from gone. My dead wife's dream was about to be auctioned off to cover Leonard's poker debts. This is what losing looks like, I thought. Wednesday night, I drove to Bozeman. Got to Marcus and Petra's house at 11 p.m. Every light was off except one upstairs. I rang the doorbell, waited, rang again. Marcus answered in a bathrobe, his face carefully neutral. Thad, it's late. Where's Petra? She's resting. Doctor's orders. Postpartum depression is serious, and she needs... Where is Petra? You need to leave. You're not well, and you're scaring. I heard Lily fussing inside, heard Petra's voice from upstairs. Who's at the door? Petra, I called past him. Friday, 10 a.m. courthouse. I need you there. Marcus tried to close the door. I put my boot in the jamb. 40 years of rage and grief concentrated in my eyes. Move! Something in my voice made him step back. Petra appeared at the top of the stairs, holding Lily. Our eyes met across the distance Marcus had tried to create. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were clear. The emails, I said. Bring the emails. She nodded once. I drove home and didn't sleep for 2 days. By Friday morning, my blood pressure was 160/95. I could feel my pulse in my temples, taste copper in my mouth. Dr. Rourke had called in a prescription after I told her what was happening, and I swallowed the pill with cold coffee at 6 a.m. This was the cost of winning, I thought, even when you win. Rebecca met me at the courthouse at 9:30. Any word from Petra? No. Then we go with what we have. Medical documentation, financial records, the trust. It's solid, but without her testimony about the emails, she'll be here. I said it with more confidence than I felt. The hearing was set for courtroom 3. Judge Martha Hendricks presiding, 60-something, reputation for no-nonsense rulings. Marcus and his attorney were already there when we arrived. Leonard and Vivian sat behind them, Leonard looking older than his 69 years, Vivian staring at her hands. 9:55, no Petra. 9:58, still nothing. At 9:59, the back door opened. Petra walked in carrying Lily in her car seat, a manila folder under her arm. She looked at Marcus once, just once, and I saw him flinch. She sat down behind me, leaned forward and whispered, "Let's finish this." Judge Hendricks called the court to order. Marcus's attorney went first, painted a picture of a declining elder, isolated and vulnerable, at risk of self-harm, called Marcus as a witness. Marcus played his part well. Concerned son-in-law, voice full of regret that it had come to this. He testified about the phone call Monday night, my erratic behavior, my threats. Mr. Kane was so concerned, his attorney said, that he felt he had no choice but to seek emergency intervention to protect his father-in-law from himself. Then Vivian took the stand, testified she'd been at their house Monday night, heard me on speakerphone, heard me say, I didn't want to go on anymore. It was a good performance. If I hadn't known it was all lies, I might have believed it myself. Then Rebecca stood up. She introduced Dr. Rourke's cognitive assessment. The psychiatric evaluation from Dr. Patrick Morse, court appointed just 2 days ago, certifying me as fully competent. The APS report. My financial record showing perfect management. The trust documents proving I'd proactively protected my assets. Then she pulled out her phone records. Your Honor, Mr. Brennan's phone records show no outgoing call to Marcus Kane on Monday night. No call at all for the past 3 weeks. The call Mr. Kane and his mother testified about never happened. Marcus's attorney objected, but Judge Hendricks waved him off. She was looking at the phone records with the expression of someone who'd seen every variation of human greed and wasn't impressed. Continue, Ms. Chen. Rebecca entered the emails into evidence. The conservatorship strategy discussions, the messages about forcing sale of the cabin, the timeline showing Marcus's systematic campaign to build a false narrative. Then she called Petra to testify. My daughter walked to the witness stand carrying that manila folder. She was sworn in, sat down, and looked directly at the judge. Mrs. Kane, Rebecca began gently, can you tell the court about your relationship with the petitioner, Marcus Kane? He's my husband, or was. I filed for divorce 2 weeks ago. And why did you file for divorce? Petra opened the folder. Because I discovered he'd been lying to me for 6 months about my father's mental state. Because he manufactured concerns about my dad's competence as part of a scheme to gain control of his property. And because when I confronted him, he admitted the only thing he cared about was the money. She handed copies of the emails to Rebecca, who distributed them to the judge and opposing counsel. Judge Hendricks read them in silence. The courtroom was so quiet, I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. "Mrs. Kane," the judge said finally, "in your professional opinion as a physical therapist who specializes in geriatric care, and as someone who has observed your father regularly over the past 2 years, is Thaddeus Brennan incapacitated in any way?" "No, Your Honor. My father is grieving my mother's death, which is normal and healthy. He's chosen to live rurally, which is his right. But he's completely competent. He manages his finances better than most people half his age. This petition isn't about protecting him. It's about stealing from him." Marcus's attorney tried to cross-examine, suggested Petra was bitter about the divorce, that her judgment was compromised by postpartum hormones. Petra just looked at him. "My judgment is compromised? I'm not the one who filed false reports with APS. I'm not the one who tried to have a competent man declared incapacitated. And I'm not the one who lied about a phone call that never happened." Judge Hendricks had heard enough. "Petition denied. Mr. Brennan is clearly competent and capable of managing his own affairs." She looked at Marcus, and her voice went cold. "Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the State Attorney General's office for investigation of potential elder abuse and fraud. Mr. Kane, you attempted to use this court as a tool to commit theft. That will not be tolerated in my courtroom." She banged the gavel. It was over. Marcus sat frozen, his face gray. Leonard put his head in his hands. Vivian was already heading for the exit. Petra walked past Marcus without looking at him. She handed me Lily's car seat. "Let's go home, Dad." We drove back to the cabin in convoy, Petra following me in her car, Lily asleep in the back seat. The September sun was setting over the mountains, painting everything gold. For the first time in 6 months, I could breathe. The aftermath took months to sort out. The Attorney General investigated, but ultimately declined to pursue criminal charges. Insufficient evidence of criminal intent, they said. But Marcus lost plenty anyway. The divorce went through. Petra got full custody of Lily, child support, and half their marital assets. Marcus tried to claim the cabin should be considered community property since Petra would inherit it, but the irrevocable trust made that argument dead on arrival. His Series 7 license came under review after Rebecca filed a professional conduct complaint. Last I heard, he was selling insurance in Billings and living with his parents. Leonard and Vivian sold their house to pay off the HELOC and moved to a small condo. I almost felt bad for them. Almost. But they'd been willing participants in their son's scheme, and sometimes you make your choices and live with them. As for me, the victory came with a price I hadn't fully anticipated. 3 weeks after the hearing, I woke at 2 a.m. with chest pain radiating down my left arm. Not a full heart attack, the ER doctor was clear about that, but a cardiac event, stress-induced. My blood pressure had been spiking for months, and my body finally sent a bill I couldn't ignore. Petra stayed with me in the hospital. Lily slept in a bassinet next to my bed, her tiny chest rising and falling. "Was it worth it?" Petra asked quietly. I looked at the heart monitor, at the IV in my arm, at 2 years of documentation and fear that had carved themselves into my cardiovascular system. "I kept your mother's dream alive," I said. "That had to be worth something." "But what did it cost you?" I thought about that. 2 years of peace, some trust in people, some health. I gestured at the monitor. Probably a few years off the back end. She squeezed my hand. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight takes something from you. Your mother understood that. She fought like hell those last 6 months, not because she thought she'd win, but because surrender wasn't in her nature." Petra was quiet for a long moment. "Now what?" "Now we rebuild. Slowly. Together." It took 6 months before I stopped checking the security cameras every morning. 8 months before I could answer the phone without my pulse jumping. A year before Sunday dinners felt normal instead of like waiting for the next attack. But we got there. Slowly. Imperfectly. Together. Petra and Lily live in Cody now, about 20 minutes from the cabin. We have dinner every Sunday. Lily's 18 months old, toddling around the cabin, pointing at everything and yelling, "Papa," when she sees me. Petra's doing well, started her own physical therapy practice, sees a counselor weekly, takes it one day at a time. She's seeing someone new, a teacher named David. Seems like a decent guy. I keep my distance, stay polite, once burned and all that. But he's good with Lily, and he doesn't ask about property values, so maybe that's enough. The cabin is still in the trust, still going to Petra eventually. But for now, it's mine, my refuge, my connection to Sarah. The place where I learned that protecting what matters sometimes means fighting people you wish you didn't have to fight. I'm 65 now. Blood pressure's under control with medication. Fishing's good. Some days are harder than others. Grief doesn't follow a schedule, but I've got Lily's laugh to look forward to, and Sunday dinners to plan, and mountains that don't change no matter what happens in the valley below. Life didn't turn out the way Sarah and I planned, but I protected her dream. I protected our daughter's inheritance. I protected my right to live my life on my own terms. And I learned something Sarah tried to tell me during those last 6 months, but I was too scared to hear. That protection and preparation aren't paranoia. They're love in practical form. They're how you take care of people even when you're not sure you can take care of yourself. Some things are worth fighting for, even when surrender would be easier. Even when the fight costs you something you can't get back. This cabin was one of them. I'm sitting on the porch right now, watching the sun come up over the valley. Coffee in my hand. Silence all around except for the wind in the pines and the creek running through the property. Sarah would have loved this morning. The light, the quiet, the way the world feels new before anyone else wakes up. I think she'd be proud of what I did. Not the fighting. She hated conflict. But the protecting. The standing firm when it would have been easier to let go. That's enough. It has to be enough. The deck board I was replacing that day Marcus asked his question. I finished it last week. Solid now. Should last another 20 years. Some foundations, once you build them right, don't crack.